session. Just wanted to remind everybody that work sessions of the board are public meetings allowing a community to be present to hear questions and dialogue from us, the board, regarding some important matters of the school corporation. While the work sessions are not open to public comment, we will provide blank comment questions that the community members may submit. And in addition, we've purposely scheduled this for tonight when we have a regular scheduled meeting at 7 p.m. where public comments will be seen, same agenda item. So with that, there will be public comment time at the 7 o'clock meeting. So with that, we'll call to order and just have informational items.
Thank you. And I think we will have our fifth member joining us, so we'll just
Yes,
welcome Mrs.
yes.
Hutchinson. She's
She
running
will.
a few
She
minutes
is
late.
running.
So thank you for that. As you stated, Mr. Parks, it's an opportunity for us to just kind of dig in, and also for me to share some responses to some new questions and comments we may have received since the last board meeting. We have kept the comment form open throughout this process. The Google form has been open throughout this process. I received several, we'll call it, personal emails from personal email addresses, and I email them back directly as well. But so some of the slides will speak to some of that dialogue. We have our elementary principals with us this evening, and even though we could figure out a microphone so people could be heard, but if the board has questions for any of our administrators this evening, they're on hand as well to answer any questions you might have. So I'll go through some of these quickly. I have a lot of slides in here, but I'm not going to go through nearly all of them. I have them really as resources in case we need them to answer any of your questions along the way. So just reminding everybody the timeline, we are at the November-December stop on this process. I'm still working for a January recommendation to the board with the new boundaries taking effect for the 25-26 school year. Always like to go through the priorities, and these are out there and observable. You probably have them memorized, but just always stop on this slide to say that when you push on one of these, you pull on another. These are priorities, but it's an interesting term to use that we've used from Cropper, because you can't meet all these priorities equally. The proximity to the school may be impacted when you're trying to balance the capacity of the buildings, for example. So it's very, very difficult to hit all these equally along the process. We had some realities that we shared since September and prior, but in the first September communication, a lot of these bullet points go all the way back to 2021 as we were preparing for the referendum that we've discussed in various forums. We know that all the boundaries would be affected. We know that perfect balance is not possible along the way. And as I stated, you know, the school closest to your address is really common, if not almost, you know, ubiquitous across elementary boundaries across the state and across the country because of how demographics change throughout districts over time. So we didn't know, of course, yet until we make the final recommendation and what developments may be on the horizon as well. Our first slide here of maps is, again, just a look at our current boundary. This is our current elementary boundaries. You can see Perry Worth has the largest footprint, capturing families from literally right across the street from the new elementary school and beyond into Lebanon, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is some of our data our current under our current boundaries. You can see what stands out there. Perry Worth being near the capacity at the new additions to the building. We've added the classrooms. We're moving into those as we speak, but they're right at that number of 600. Actually, they pushed a little bit above that number. They're at 610 or 611 as of a week and a half ago. So they're probably pushed closer to 100% as well. You can see some red on the table with free and reduced lunch comparisons. That would mean that they're over 15% from the average in those rows, or pardon me, in those columns. And so obviously that's one of our priorities as well, is to take a look at that as we draw the boundaries. Option A was an option that impacted the most students in the district, and we'll see those tables in a moment, and had some creative solutions, we'll call it, to some of these things on the table that you saw. However, from a utilization standpoint, it turned all the schools green. It balanced them between Harney and Hattie B. Stokes, into the 60s. I'm sorry, Central and Hattie B. Stokes into the 60s. But it did keep Harney at a fairly, and Perryworth at above a 70% utilization. So just kind of pushed some numbers into some different categories there, if you will. Didn't really move the needle, however, on the free and reduced lunch socioeconomic piece as much. Option B looks very similar to option A because most of the changes happened kind of in the center of the city of Lebanon, if you will, up there in the city proper as well. Utilization more balanced across 3 of the elementary schools, moved the needle in the socioeconomic piece, certainly. Did and does involve some creativity in doing that. Getting to those numbers required moving 2 current Hattie B. Stokes apartment complexes to Central Elementary, and they are located very close to Hattie B. Stokes. So that's the push and pull of those priorities in action, right? We've received a lot of comments and a lot of feedback, and so went back to Cropper GIS and their assistants and took a look at what an option C may look like. I think I had a map there, a little bit different as it goes with the Hattie B. Stokes attendance boundary kind of moving horizontally across the district. Kind of a long 32 would be that northern border of Perryworth and Hattie B. Stokes. We're in the green on utilization. And I want to point out on this slide, because one of the commenters on the Google slide, and I appreciated the comments, by the way. The comments and questions have been great. I mean, they've been spot on in noticing things. They pointed out the red on the paid lunch at Hattie B. Stokes, but I want to go back to B briefly. It's 1% difference from being yellow, right? So just to put that in math perspective, option C would have Hattie B. Stokes, I believe, at, I'm going to back up one again. Well, where's the capacity at? I think it was 380 some odd students as their student. That's 3.8 students, right? So giving some perspective to, and the data used to fill these tables was taken from October 1st. That was the October 1st count day. So there's a lot of ins and outs, move-ins, move-outs that happen over the course of a school year, let alone over the course of a summer. So we're very close to being in the greens and the yellows in C. I just wanted to point that out. We're 1 percentage point different from those numbers on option C. Just wanted to go through those. These were the impacts on each of the 3 options. You can see, again, based on October 1st numbers, not knowing how many kindergarten students we're going to have next year, that's another factor. 241 would have been impacted on option A, 436 in option B, and 238 students in option C. And then the table, which again is out for public view, you can see how many students in the tan rows move from one school to another. The green rows represents the students who would stay in their current boundaries. The next few slides, we had at the regular board meeting elected official who came and spoke to the board during the public comment. It's a bit unusual, not unusual that public figures speak at other public board meetings, but a little bit unusual in kind of the conversation that took place around this process and how it evolved. So I just wanted to take some time, just a few minutes, and respond to those comments from the regular meeting. The councilwoman who spoke mentioned that she was not aware of the project, and I just wanted to assure the board that I had a personal conversation with the councilwoman about this project, about some of the challenges that we had, the challenges of feasibility of building a fifth elementary school. And so I just wanted to assure the board, there's been multiple conversations across municipalities, met with the mayor here in Lebanon. I've spoken to town and city government throughout this process, all through the referendum campaign as well. So I just wanted to share that. It was a little confused by that comment because the conversation took place. There was a narrative that had, please go ahead.
I mean, in those, several of the council folks in Whitestown that changed over
That's
since,
true.
even since this conversation began
That's
as
true.
well.
That's
correct?
true. I've met with the town manager, both the previous town manager and the current town manager, was a guest on the current town manager's podcast this past summer. I actually met with the past town manager and council president. I think I was probably only on the job first 2 or 3 months, and really spoke to the second bullet here as much as anything, because the conversation was about a narrative that's circulating through Whitestown that Dr. Taylor had promised that there would be a school built in Whitestown. I've talked to Dr. Taylor several times, as you can imagine. We talk often, as he's the director of our Superintendent's Association, but also a good friend and colleague. And, you know, you can read that. I'm not going to read it for you, but there was conversations about, you know, if the trajectory of growth continued or if it accelerated, you know, over time, that it would be something that, of course, a school district would look at, whether it would be a feasible option. It's not a feasible option for all the bullet points that we've shared publicly, but there was certainly not a promise that there would be a building down there, and that's from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I just wanted to kind of put that to rest.
There were also slides on the State of the Schools presentation
That's correct.
that you gave. That was back in
August, September.
Right around then.
Yeah.
And I know there were representatives from Whitestown Town Council as well as the town manager here, because I went up, shook their hands, introduced myself, made sure they knew who I was, and
Right.
offered them, you know, my information to contact me. So,
Yeah.
you know, the narrative that this was a surprise is a little misleading, because there have been multiple instances where this has been addressed.
Yeah.
This has been coming. Maybe the way the maps were potentially drawn surprised people.
Right.
But there's never been conversation with any of these individuals that a new school was about to be built in Whitestown.
No.
So any narrative of that is something that's quite
That's
frankly
correct.
outdated at this point.
That's correct. And, you know, that goes back to the 2019 conversation, honestly, with the town government. It was, you know, we would have as a goal to not put folks in a position that they are not currently in this district, or that are unusual in many circumstances across the state, as far as how long it takes to get to one school to another, and the commitment to raise the level of our buildings, our modern, you know, modernize our buildings, high-quality facilities for all students, which we are clearly doing at this time. So, yeah, and realtors as well, Mr. Clauser, I'd point that out. During our referendum campaign in 2021 and 2022, we hosted all of the area realtors. And, of course, I live this every day, right? And I understand people have day jobs and don't follow enrollment rebalancing of the school district on a daily basis. That's not day jobs. Realistic. But we did try to reach out to as many folks plugged into this conversation as we could for the last 5 or 6 years. There was another comment made about a constituent who had apparently made a comment that if they had to drive to Hattie B. Stokes and not continue at Perry Worth, that they would take their children to Western Boone. So I just wanted to put some data in front of the board, because I didn't know how to respond to the councilwoman's comments there, and I just struggled with it, because I just Google mapped from LA Cafe to Hattie B. Stokes. It was 13 minutes. It's 28 minutes to Granville Wells. It's 31 minutes to Thorntown. We offer transportation to the in-district students. Neither Western Boone or us, and we exchange students through open borders. We do not offer transportation to the Western Boone students who attend here, and he does not offer transportation to the Lebanon students who attend Western Boone. So I just wanted to point that out. Just leaving it there. I don't really understand that comment, but it was one that was made to the board, so I just wanted to give you some data around that. There was another comment made that Dr. Taylor approved the construction of the Peabody neighborhood, and that there was a promise that the students would go to Perry Worth. I, again, was a little confused by that comment. Superintendents don't approve building in neighborhoods. And that particular neighborhood went through the approval process after Dr. Taylor retired. So I'm not exactly sure what that was referencing. It might have been referencing a conversation I had with the Pulte builders that were building that neighborhood about elementaries. I did have a sit down with them about that, and shared with them that it's usually not the wisest choice to jump and build a school into a brand-new neighborhood. And Dr. McKibben has pointed out, in our case, it would be unwise to do that based on what he considers to be our growth pattern. Stay tuned for the January 13th work session, where he will be in person to present his new enrollment forecast. That might have been what it was referring to, but we did share that we were increasing the capacity throughout the district to be able to absorb growth over a period of time. There was a comment about Hattie B. Stokes and Perry Worth District that intersected her particular parcel that she owned. I just want to point out to the board, this is not unusual at all. There's state statute around what to do when township lines, city lines. We have parcels on the Ohio-Indiana border, Union County, where it goes through parcels, and parents decide which school district in what state they're going, and it gets that complicated. And I know the example I gave you is the Lilly project. It straddles Western Boone and Lebanon School District. It straddles Washington and Center Township. So again, I wasn't really sure how to answer that question, because it's really actually pretty common.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very common even from boundaries of different districts.
Yeah.
One side or the other.
Absolutely.
You have to draw a line somewhere.
I'm aware of one, because we went through this project in a previous district that I worked at, that the school boundary went through the dwelling, the two school districts, and the line went through the house. So there's some rules around that in Indiana about how you decide where they go to school. Basically, it's the people's choice for the most part. And then I think this is the last one that was shared with the board, that there was a neighborhood connection to Perry Worth. It's 13 to 14 minutes to Perry Worth from her particular parcel, which is the same amount of time it's going to take with any of the parcels that might move from currently Perry Worth to Hattie B. Stokes. So I was a little bit confused about why a 13 to 14 minute drive to Perry Worth is acceptable, but a drive of 13 to 14 minutes to Hattie B. Stokes is not acceptable. So that's what that bullet point points out. So I didn't really send a response, because some of these I was confused on how to, but they were pretty significant, I felt, with an elected official talking to the school board about that, so I wanted to give it some time this evening. This is the biggest one that we've heard throughout the conversation is why am I not going to the closest school? And so I have a few slides on that. Again, the reality is it's rare that all districts do that. I'm going to blow through these here real quick for you. We've had that in place really since the inception of Lebanon schools. That's what this slide shows, that this has been in place in Lebanon Community School Corporation since the 70s. We have parcels that are right across the railroad tracks from Harney Elementary that were assigned to Perry Worth. We currently, as I pointed out, have many families that are closer to Central attending Perry Worth. That drive, we have folks in Perry Township that have a similar drive to Perry Worth. So this is not new in the district at all for our families. Again, there's our current boundaries. There's my examples. You can go back to the 80s and 90s. I presented this at the board meeting, but I wanted to show you some examples that we pulled. This is Brownsburg, much smaller footprint really as a school district, very suburban district as well. Dr. McKibben and Mr. Cropper like to avoid enclaves. This is like the poster child for enclaves. This shows what happens within when your demographics change. They have to fill their schools. This is not a criticism of Brownsburg. They just have to do what they have to do, right, to make sure their capacity and utilization is maximized. So we pulled 4 examples. It's hard for you to see, probably some people from the screen up there, but the first 4 examples, these are 4 separate elementaries in Brownsburg. So they're 4 separate drive times in neighborhoods very similar to our suburban neighborhoods. You can see one is 16 minutes, 13 and 15 minutes, depending on which one you click, 14 minutes and 12 minutes. So we border Brownsburg. This is what our neighbors do. Is it ideal? No. Would it be great to go for everybody to go across the street to their school? Absolutely. And that's why it's one of the priorities. So in this process, that's really literally what you do. You talk about utilization of the elementaries, and you basically move out from the schools. And then you go, whoops, you're looking at socioeconomics, free reduce, and then you're like, okay, well, now we got to think about pushing the border this way. Well, that won't work because now our, and then that's how enclaves happen. I mean, that's how these appear as part of the process. So they've done that work. Western Boone, another example there as well. And I think I'm almost done with my portion of this. The other question that had come up was bus rides. There was a question about, will this be longer times? I'll show this slide again to the board. Actually, in B and A, we're so close, I didn't make Ms. Nichols do 3 routes because A and B are so close from a bus standpoint. Our current routes, you can see how many are over 30 minutes and how many are over 40 minutes. And in option B and C, think A when you think B, you can see they're relatively, almost unchanged, actually a little lower as well. Yes, all these options were consistent with the referendum campaign. I want to push through here because I want to get to a couple other pictures and remind people. I thought this was important because it's talking about how soon will we have to do this again. There's a couple things you keep in mind. One is if the enrollment begins to decline in one school, you probably aren't going to spend. I'm probably not going to recommend we spend $20 million adding onto a building if we can move the boundary again and be at a better utilization. That just would not make sense. But I did want to point out that 3 of our elementaries are expandable. So if enrollment did some, astronomical shift, right, that was a rocket ship all of a sudden, we do have the ability to expand. So this is the example of, I think, Perry Worth growing by another 4 classrooms. This is an example of Hattie B. Stokes growing by 5 classrooms. And then this is the example of Central growing by 4 additional classrooms as well. So it can go up to a 650 to 700 at Central, same at Perry Worth. It'll push Hattie B. Stokes into the 650 range. So we're already at 2375 seats at the end of this summer. We have 1,700 students. So we did build a 5th elementary school, but we kept it within the 4 walls of our current 4 elementary schools. And we're going to be able to do a more efficient job with those.
Yeah, and
4
we even
elements.
considered shrinking the number of schools and
We
expanding
did.
them larger. I know.
We did, and then we ran into the
Yep.
dollar
Yep.
law, because we
Yep.
talked about demolishing Harney. Also 1957 building, that would have been made the most logical sense of which building to demolish.
Central, not Harney.
No, Harney.
Harney?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Because we were talking about mega, like, we'll call them large elementary school, like going to 3
Big.
large
yeah.
footprints. Knowing what we know now through construction, that might have been even more difficult on Perry Worth's property because of drainage challenges. And once you get into that, and we know what we know now with what we had to do drainage-wise, I'm not sure 1,000-student elementary school would have worked logistically on that site, especially when you're talking about getting car riders and buses separated and, getting everybody on the campus. So, yeah, that's a good point. So I'll stop there. You guys have been through this, been hearing my conversation for a long time. I had shared with Mr. Parks in a private conversation. Hope you guys are hard on me. Ask me the tough questions, ask us the tough questions about this process, so. Anything out there?
I mean, the one we keep hearing is the accuracy of the demographic
Yeah.
studies, and the growth, and that we are way under anticipating that, or that the numbers are. If you could just expand on that a
Sure.
little bit.
I'll hopefully blow this up to a point that maybe people can see it, and I can also see it on my screen. We've shifted our conversation quite a bit to the yield study. They're called yield studies. I don't know if you can see them on your screen. How you doing out there? Can you see those numbers or not? I need to get bigger. I may have to go slide to side with you. So Cropper GIS put together yield studies for us, and this was from July of 2023. And they geocode and map the entire district, including districts that are neighborhoods that are under construction, established neighborhoods, and what is the yield? What is the student yield from those types of dwellings? And we got data from every type of dwelling, right? Apartments, condos, mobile homes, single-family dwellings. So I did confirm with Mr. Cropper that he feels like our yields will hold for the most part. You'll see a bump in student enrollment in the early stages of a neighborhood being built, but then students begin aging out in 3, 4, 5 years. They begin to age out of the elementary, age out of the middle school, and then graduate high school. So what happens is you might see a little bump in enrollment. Your yield might be a little higher on the front end. Then it settles. Then it continues to decline. As Dr. McKibben points out, folks stay in their current home at least 15 years, typically at least 15 years after their youngest child graduates high school. So those homes don't generate K-12 students, which is why it's not wise often to jump and build a building in the middle of a brand new neighborhood, because what you find yourself doing 20 years later is busing kids from across the district to try to fill that building. Harney was built in 1957. This is a school building is a long-term commitment. And so you really want to try to be strategic in your location of buildings that may not be where the actual projects are being built, but is more centered in your district or centered between developments. That's why I keep showing the map of what the geographic center of our district is. Hattie B. Stokes is the closest elementary to the center of our district. So it's actually in a pretty darn good location when you think about where it strategically plays. So these yield studies, you look at Walker Farms, for example, across the top there, that's the wrong Walker Farms. Walker Farms is our most established neighborhood. I think I can find it here. I have it memorized. It's 0.271 students per dwelling.
Second from the top.
Well, actually, that's the wrong one, I think, because I think it says 0. There must be a Walker Farms nobody knows anything about. Here it is, right here in the middle of the screen. 1,000 dwellings, 1,024 dwellings, 0.271 ratio, K-12. It's not K-5, which is what we're working on here, right? So we applied 0.271 into some of the dwellings the neighborhoods that are currently under construction to try to get a.
Which are about the
projection.
same density.
About the same, or smaller.
Yep.
One is, I'm gonna have to shrink this just for a second so I can find it. The one that's being talked about quite a bit is that Peabody neighborhood, which is 775 units. And if you do a yield study of that, I think it generated around 210 students. Nationally, it's between 0.40 and 0.6. We are below the national average in our yield. So Mr. Cropper suggested that I plug in 0.4 just in case, right? Kind of a just in case number. And he said that would be a good number because it's significantly higher than our current yield. So just going to the bottom line here, you would look at if it was 0.40, I used option C because I just picked it and it was the one getting the most discussion. It would generate 1,273 students. We say, wow, we need to start building now. Well, that's over time. It's K-12, and we have over 600 available elementary seats. So, that's 6 grades at the elementary, 7 grades at the high school. We're adding capacity at the middle school now to absorb that here. We have capacity here at the high school. So that's a long answer to say what the lawyers say. Depends. That's the lawyer's favorite answer. Depends. How long are we going to live with this current redistricting model? It depends. But the numbers would indicate that it's a pretty significant amount of time to be able to absorb the growth over the time. And Dr. McKibben would point out that a lot of assumptions have to happen to hit these numbers. Interest rates, mortgage rates, and Dr. McKibben points out that where we're sitting right now is probably going to see as much growth as the new construction over the next 3 to 5 years. This is a very aging population where within a couple mile radius of where we're seated right now. There's a lot of folks over the age of 70. So just because of what happens naturally, homes are going to begin to turn over in this vicinity right here. And what happens when they turn over is we typically see student enrollment increase because it's families buying those houses and replacing the folks that have been there. So he predicts some growth here. He said if you'd ever have to build another school, you're probably going to want to do it either north of Whitestown, between Whitestown and Lebanon, or west of 65.
West of 65.
Because there's going to be a lot of farm. I keep pointing out to our new school board members in attendance tonight, there's a lot of developments buying up property out in your neck of the woods. And so, that could be the next big pattern of growth, but we may be talking 10 years for that type of that minimum, I would think. So it's a good question, long answer to a really good question. So yes, we are tracking that.
Yeah, and another thing that I kind of just would like to add on that too is a lot of the comments, I live in, Worth Township, so, the most impacted under pretty much all the options is going to be, the neighborhoods that are surrounding me and my house, and, it's going to be an impact on everybody in my community. So it's something that I've been trying to respond to. One thing that I've been getting a lot is, Trailside's not built out yet. We've got Jackson Run not fully built out yet. And one thing that I just want to point to is under our current enrollment, Perry Worth, again, at 600 students, or maybe just north of that. We've got Hattie Stokes at around 320 at a 575, 600 capacity school. These options build in flexibility as those neighborhoods are completed, so that we're not going to be back in this same exact spot in 3 years as these neighborhoods are finished. So I'm not saying it's a perfect option for everybody, but we are considering the fact that these neighborhoods have to be completed first.
Right.
And this does that because it gives us the most flexibility in terms of it gets all of our numbers across the board down, it gets all of our utilization rates down, but also gives us the most flexibility at some of those schools that are going to be able to absorb some of those neighborhoods as they're finished.
Right.
So that's something that I like about all these options, rather than, and all this to say, it really kind of comes back to the real issue here is that I see is everybody still wants that Whitestown school. That is not a feasible option.
Right.
I don't know where we'd buy the land right now for it.
Right. Right.
Land's going for 65, 70,000 an acre in Whitestown. So we're going to be $2 million in the hole before we even start anything.
Right.
That just
And you need
financially.
25 acres.
What's that?
You need at least 25.
Yeah, at least 25 acres. So maybe not quite 2 million, but,
Yeah,
close to it.
right.
So
Right.
I just, I think that I appreciate the time that's been put into this, because I think this is giving us these options give us a lot of flexibility that we are going to require, because redistricting is something that may come up again sooner than what we may like, but this gives us options.
There's flexibility around these options as well. I've spoken about Peabody a couple times, that it's on either side of 575, so there's actually a west and an east. And so it's really not splitting hairs when I say this about keeping neighborhoods together. There can be flexibility in keeping neighborhoods together because there's always going to be a boundary. In town right now, on one side of the street, you go to Harney, but on the other side of the street, you go to Central. I mean, that's just a reality, right? So it could be possible down the road that one side of that development goes to one school or the other. It might pan out that, the .271 yield for Walker Farms, for example, is a total K-12 yield. The elementary yield is like .143. Is much lower when you think about it's a combined yield number. So if we don't start seeing students out of these neighborhoods, maybe at some point they are Perryworth neighborhood. And that's fine, because it might make sense, because Becky Nichols might come to Mr. Dennis and I and say, we need that neighborhood to go back to Perryworth because of the way it's growing now west of 65, or the way it's growing now east of Lebanon, where there was a development on the board at one time, east of the fairgrounds, for example, 450 home development that is currently off the board, but it was on the board 2 years ago. I had a call from the developer. If those start moving, she might start saying, we might have to push Mr. Larison back up to 85% capacity, 90% capacity, because that's what we need to do from an efficiency standpoint too. So it gives us those flexibilities down the road to be able to react to that.
Now, one thing I also wanted to touch on was on the bus routes.
Yep.
And this is something that I'd mentioned at the last meeting. I'm not sure if, I know, especially Becky, I know that we've been asking you to kind of go back to the drawing board a lot over the past few months. Were we able to look at what a projected route, time would look like from Jackson Run as it stands right now at Perryworth to what that run might look like going to Stokes in terms of the total?
Good question.
The total route from that specific neighborhood, or Bridal Oaks, one of those.
I mean, if you're just talking student ridership and not the dead time of the driver, all of them are within 30 to 25, 30, 35 minutes at the most.
So you wouldn't,
13 minutes to get out there, so essentially if you spend the other 20 minutes
Right.
doing, 10, 12, 15 stops, depending on how many students are adding stops to the capacity of the bus, and then the travel time that it takes the 13 minutes back, to
Yeah.
get to the Stokes. So.
because I think the narrative has somewhat become like, the Jackson Run kids or the Bridal Oaks kids are going to get picked up, and then they're going to sit on the bus
Right.
while that route goes to, all over the district then, and they're going to be on the bus for an hour. I mean, that's a thing that I've had said to me, and I've tried to assure people that no, that's not what we're actually looking like. So I mean, from your end, realistically, would you expect that? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I am going to. Would you expect that, because it's an extra 5 minutes from Perryworth to 5 or 6 minutes from my house to between getting to Stokes and getting to Perryworth. So from a rider perspective, when you pick up that student, would you expect that to rise by more than 10, 12 minutes from what going to Perryworth versus going to Stokes would look like for a Jackson Run, Bridal Oaks, that kind of neighborhood?
I really don't. And a lot of the reason is because I truly, by the districts or the housing developments that we're looking at moving to these schools, like that's a whole bus. Like one bus goes into Jackson Run East right now and picks up, 40 elementary students, and that's, a whole busload. And then we go straight to the school. So right now, if it's Perryworth, we go straight to Perryworth. So, getting home from Perryworth in the afternoons, if they roll out of the parking lot at Perryworth at 4 o'clock, my bus is actually headed back into the shop by 4:30. But most all of my buses return back to the lot, except for the Fayette bus that's, the furthest out.
Sure.
Fayette. Everybody's back normally between 4:45 and 10:05. I don't look for that to be any different, honestly.
And I think that's a really good piece of information for families to kind of understand, because it's not going to be a situation where we're really being that disruptive. The bus routes are gonna be similar. It's just, instead of that one bus stopping at Perry Worth, they're going on up. There's no more stops between Perry Worth and Hattie B. Stokes at that point. So
And another example, I guess, that just comes to my mind is in the northeast corner of the district, like primarily farm ground still. So basically, I'm talking like from 100 south north to the 400 north, our boundary, and out to 800, our eastern boundary. And that whole area is one bus right now. And, she weaves her way around all the county roads, has to do several turnarounds, obviously, because of where the students live. But that whole bus is just gonna shift from heading from there all the way down to Perry Worth to just going to Central.
Right.
And it's a lot closer to where they live, actually. And that's just gonna be a whole bus. So instead of routing that bus, I mean, it seems like it might be a lot, but instead of routing that bus to Perry Worth, we're just gonna route that bus to Central. It'll be the same kids, same bus, same,
it'll look similar, it's just
it
final
will. It will
destination looks
very,
different.
Very similar. They'll just be going to a different school as far as their drop-off and pickup location.
And lastly, John, this one's for you. I know that this was kind of a question that came up regarding, people who have employment and things like that. I think there's been somewhat of a concern that, okay, if I'm driving this extra 5, 6, 7 minutes to Stokes is kind of just become in my mind in terms of what my common example is here. But, how much time is that adding to a commute? And I think you did the math on the distance from Stokes to, say, downtown Indy
Yeah.
versus Perry Worth to
It's about,
downtown Indy.
it's 2 to 3, depending on traffic pattern, depends on when you plug it into Google Maps, but it can be 2 to 3 minutes difference or 3 to 5 minutes different because Hattie B. Stokes is right on 65, so you don't have any, once you drop your kid at the door at Stokes, you're on 65. That is if they've opened the exit.
Yeah, the exit itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was closed.
And there's 2 roundabouts, too, so
Recently,
quickly,
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's
Today
2
it's
roundabouts, yeah, not even a stoplight. So it's really, once you drop them at the door, but the reality is, yeah, you'll have to get breakfast in 8 to 10 minutes earlier because you're gonna add the time that it takes to get the 5 to 7 minutes that you pointed out from your near your neighborhood. And that essentially is the difference. And, of course, we're sensitive to that. We hope that we're bringing Perry Worth down to capacity in the 70s, 70% range. If it's a family that has a pre-K student, this is going to be part of that programming that we're working on spinning up here. There are 2 classrooms that we hope at Perry Worth will be dedicated to that program. That's been the plan all along. If enrollment requires us to use them as classrooms, we will have to do that. But there are 2 classrooms there so that they work in Indianapolis and they have I guess they'll have to figure that out, which place they want them to go to preschool. They want to drop them at Central or one of the 2 classrooms at Perry Worth. So I am sensitive to that. We also have, I'll just point out the fact that, again, we've had families that have driven their children to Perry Worth from John Bart Road and work in Lafayette. We have a significant number of folks. Mr. Bertrand's father works in Lafayette, for example, and he went K-12 through our program as well. And so we do have families that may go to Perry Worth and then hop on 65 and go north. So, I mean, that's just been part of our fabric for a long time.
And Dr. Mellon, just to interject too, I mean, I think we need to, those parents, I guess, I'm thinking, need to think about the traffic pattern at Albert S. White and what I call 267 interchange, because when Wally's gets built and all that, all that traffic starts flowing into Wally's too, and then you've got the construction, or the semi-traffic going over to the truck stop. I feel like if you go to Stokes and you just jump right on the interstate and then unpopulated intersection right onto the interstate, it's probably gonna be just as quick.
Sure.
As
It's a good point.
utilizing Albert S. White at that point.
It's a good point.
Something that just comes to my mind, one, change is hard. We all know that, and it's painful, right? I mean, and with any change, we're going to make some people mad,
and some people happy. I mean, just like if you're working out, you're going to make some muscles angry, and some muscles the next day are going to be happy with you, right? Because they weren't modified. It's change is difficult, and I think that we've done a great job of. You've done a great job of balancing all the variables. It's also like the stock market. If anybody comes up to me and asks me, is this going to work? Or are we not going to have to rebalance again? I can't tell you. This is, I guess, we have to be reactionary, but set ourselves up in such a way, diversify ourselves, our portfolio enough that we can react without major changes. Because if we react out of emotion, then it's not going to be good. And the last point I'm going to make is how important the demographic balancing is.
Yeah.
I think we have seen the effects in some of the comments that are being brought up. And I'll get point blank. Some of the comments that are being brought up is because of the demographic discrepancies that exist, that have been allowed to exist and be created in our elementary schools, that gives imagery of one being lesser than the others. And that is why this is so important for us to be considerate of that and understand that on our staff, on the students, having that demographic balanced is so important. And we have gone above and beyond. Every elementary school is being constructed to have similar feel. No, they're not all exactly the same. They're not a cookie cutter, but they will all have similar capabilities, opportunities for all the children, no matter where they are. And I think that's ultimately what our goal is here, right? Is to make sure that every child in this district gets an equal opportunity. Doesn't have to be bused so long. That every opportunity to be exposed to various demographics. I know that was important for me as an adopted father, right? Of making sure that you're exposed to a lot more races and everything else that comes with that. And so I think it's excellent. We're trying to look through a crystal ball to do what's best for our children, and ultimately, and we can't just think emotionally. And we have to trust, just like we do in the stock market, we have to trust experts who do this daily, that they are not, yes, they don't live here.
Right.
But they have been in this. They are the experts that understand the waves of any school district's enrollment, in population, in the change that we see in neighborhoods. So
I appreciate
I'll
that.
shut up with that.
One way I've said it to our group is you want your schools to reflect your community.
Yeah.
There's another way
Yeah.
of saying that. You want your schools to reflect the diversity in your community, whether that be socioeconomically or otherwise. And you see in all these options, you don't get to perfection. That's one of the realities that we shared on the slide as well. You don't get to perfect balance. That's
Correct.
not possible. And I will share too, that Mr. Franz and I spoke this week, and I've consulted with some other folks as well. One of the variables that we were not ready, really, frankly, to react to was the Section 42
Yeah.
apartment complex in Whitestown. And we've been talking about, what we can look for in the future to possibly anticipate that better. Like what, is it, if I in my seat missed that marker, then, maybe that's on me. But what layers of local government approval is required, state agency approval is required? When would we know that? Because apartments are, the student yields in apartments typically are the lowest. And when you're building apartments that are one bedroom that cost $1,800, $1,900 a month, they're not generating a lot of kids. Your yield is very low, 0.06, 0.05, very low. Meadows on Main is generating 2.0 something, right? It's quadruple what an apartment would normally yield. And so when you see that apartment go in, you're factoring in an apartment yield, not a 2.04 per unit yield. And so that's why we have 129 students from one 3-acre parcel of property. We welcome them all, we love them all, they're all Tigers, right? But it did shift quickly, that enrollment for Mr. Larison. We were tracking pretty close to Dr. McKibben's track. We were off a little. But, so we're trying to get a handle on how can we anticipate if another Section 42 enters the picture, whether that be, you know, in the city of Lebanon, town of Whitestown, because that starts shifting, Mr. Clauser, back to your, how many years will it take to do this, the people who you're talking to, that's a major variable, because now you're creating enrollment very quickly. I mean, 18 months ago, that 3-acre parcel gave us 0 kids. 18 months later, it's 129. That's significant when your district's only 3,350 at that point, starting point to begin with. That's a significant, that's more than a blip in enrollment, right? So I am asking those questions. Just want the board to know that. I'm asking those questions to legal experts and folks like, what can we look for to anticipate that in the future?
I also say, I think that the socioeconomics
It is,
of
that
that
plays into that, for sure.
turn that school upside down too, where if we're able to balance that now, it's not going to have that much of a, it will have an.
Very quick swing.
It won't have that type of a quick swing because
Or you can prepare
of there,
for it.
there isn't, yeah.
Yeah. So, just wanted to share that as well, try to get a handle on that as best we can.
And I just want to, one more quick thing, just say thanks to Dr. Milliman. I know that he's been fielding a lot of emails from people as well, and go and kind of bullet point, you know, step by step through them to respond. So if you do have questions, if anybody, you know, has questions, that's the way to get specific answers, because, you know, we're not dodging them, but you have to ask them, and we're happy to answer them. So thank you for that, though, because I know it's been, I know you've had a lot of things on your plate, and that's another thing that you've had to specifically make time for, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, thank you. Anything else?
Anything else? We are 7 minutes early, so
Fantastic.
we will go ahead and,
I'll just say here, we are doing another meeting on January 13th here.
Here.
I'm sorry, let's go first, 6th.
Yeah.
We'll have a meeting at Hattie B. Stokes. We'll go through this information again. So invite you there. Certainly invite the board there as well. I do think the citizens, the constituents, I guess we should say, appreciate your presence and your perspective from members of the community. So that will be at 6 o'clock at Hattie B. Stokes, and then we're going to do another work session prior to the reorganization meeting actually following the reorganization
Yes.
meeting here on January 13th. I believe we're doing that after 6 o'clock. I think reorg is around 6. It'll be on the website. And Dr. McKibben will be here for that
Okay.
as well, so you'll be able to see his new 10-year forecast for us.
excellent. With that, we'll adjourn.